I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our investigation into the staircase. Michael Peterson's been convicted, but is he guilty? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my fantastic co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. You're fantastic, too.
Oh, thank you, Alice. I needed to hear that today.
It was right before we started recording, we were talking about how it's tough being a lawyer and it's tough being a prosecutor. And today was one of those tough days in both of our jobs. So we are excited to be ending the day recording.
We are. We absolutely are. And just to make everybody feel better, I'm going to read one of our reviews from Apple. So you guys have been great. You've been leaving those 5-star reviews. And some of you have actually written some things. So just want to share the most recent one we got. We love them all. But this is the most recent one, so I will read it to you. It is from Journey of a Blonde Girl. It's a 5-star review, and it says, "I want more!" Exclamation point. You'll get more. I'm a longtime podcast and true crime listener. This is one of the best podcasts I have ever listened to. I'm listening to every episode again, just waiting for a new one, because I am obsessed. I love the host, and they are so brilliant and just delightful to listen to. This is the first podcast that has not only made me think more critically about the victims, but also about what most likely happened. And man, that Elisa Lam summation was amazing. I felt like I was listening to you in court. Needless to say, y'all are amazing, and I can't wait for more. And by the way, I love how y'all are doing things and talking about y'all's kids. And then two smoochy faces. So thanks, Mom. I really appreciate that review. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you to Misty for leaving that review. That's really nice of you.
You guys have no idea.
Those things mean so much.
Yeah, well, being lawyers, not only do you never get positive reviews ever, even if you do a good job, you actively get the opposite. You only get criticism from the opposing counsel, from clients, from people you prosecute, the court. So it's a very antagonistic profession.
I spend most of my days just wondering if I'm going to lose my license or get thrown in jail. So it's nice to hear nice things.
Thank you guys very much.
Yes.
Thank you to Brett's mom for writing us that review.
But today is our second day talking about the Michael Peterson trial, the Kathleen Peterson murder or death. Was it a murder? We'll have to talk about that more later. But when we left you last time, Michael Peterson had been convicted of killing his wife, Kathleen. And I'm sure there were some of you who were saying, of course he was convicted. I mean, look at all the evidence. You've got this, he has a motive because he has all these communications with other men who he may be having affairs with, and this huge bombshell about the other woman in Germany who he may or may not have also been involved with her death, and she also ended up at the bottom of a staircase. But one thing we did not tell you last time, but we're going to talk about more today, was the defense had some bombshells of their own, and the first and the biggest was the blowpoke. We told you it would come back, and man, does it ever. Because the missing blowpoke wasn't actually missing. In the middle of the trial, the defense actually produced the infamous blowpoke. But it wasn't covered in blood. It was covered in cobwebs and insect casings. and it looked like it hadn't been moved for a very long time from the place where it was found, which was in Michael Peterson's basement. An area, by the way, that the police and the Petersons had searched many times, but never saw the blowpoke leaning against the wall, just waiting to be discovered. And I got to tell you, and Alice, I don't know what you thought when they pulled that blowpoke out, but man, I can't imagine a worse day to be a prosecutor in a case than when your missing murder weapon shows up and it's not a murder weapon.
So, remember we had talked about one of the female prosecutor, how she does not have a poker face. Watching her reaction when the defense pulls out the blowpoke should be like the greatest GIF of all time. GIF, I'm not really sure how you say it, but it's incredible. And here's the thing. You have to be very, very careful as the defense how you handle this, right? If you pull out this blowpoke and you are too giddy and you are overconfident, you've lost the jury. Because they're thinking, we're at a murder trial. Why are you being giddy? But I will say, if you watch the documentary and you see Peterson's attorney driving on his way to the courthouse Rudolph, sorry, thank you. When you see Rudolph driving to the courthouse on the day they're going to reveal the blowpoke, I was watching this documentary with a friend, and he said, gosh, sure looks like Rudolph just had sex. That's how happy he looked.
Yeah.
Which is
and
not.
You can imagine why.
Because they are months into this trial. And I mean, we are talking months into trial, and every single day, I think the jury has heard the term blowpoke. And they keep saying, where's the missing blowpoke? He beat her with it, and then it mysteriously goes missing, so we can't even test it to see if her blood's on it. And then the blowpoke arrives. So, what was on the blowpoke? Because you can clean blood off, right? But here's the thing, you can also test to see if blood's been cleaned off. And there was none of that. Nothing at all that tied this blowpoke to Kathleen.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. I mean, like we said last time, I doubt anybody's ever heard of a blowpoke before. You know, speaking of sex, it sounds like something that would be on the menu of a brothel. But
I think we'd have to rate this episode as like explicit or something. I'm sorry, parents. Maybe we'll bleep out.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there's so many things to talk about with this blowpoke. So let's just go ahead and talk about them because there are so many things. If you've seen the documentary, you know that one of the first things that members of the defense team, or excuse me, the prosecution team, and Caitlin, who is Kathleen's daughter, and I think even some of the reporters who are covering it, they're immediately, is this actually the blowpoke? Did they, find this blowpoke somewhere and just leave it there for a while so it would get the cobwebs or whatever, and then they can, boom, there it is. It is interesting. They did actually buy a few blowpokes earlier on because they needed them for various reasons. Testing, to sort of figure out whether or not a blowpoke could actually cause some of these damages. That story came out, and some people try to use that to say, ha-ha, they got this blowpoke from somewhere else. But it turns out, and I feel like we know fairly definitively that this blowpoke is the blowpoke from their house. If you've seen the documentary, at one point, Rudolph says, and I have no reason to think he's lying here. If anybody can disprove this, please let me know, that the police actually found the blowpoke, and they found it very early on. And in fact, they had taken it from where it was in the basement and photographed it outside in the light. And for whatever reason, it's either they didn't recognize it as the blowpoke, or they didn't really start thinking that the blowpoke might have been involved until Candace Zamparini, who is the sister of Kathleen Peterson, really pushed the blowpoke as a potential weapon, and that was after this. But for whatever reason, even though the police found it and photographed it, they just didn't realize what they'd found. And certainly, if that blowpoke had had blood on it, then they most certainly would have noticed that or known that. If it had damage, dents, the kind of things you would expect if you beat somebody over the head with something, they would have found it on there. So,
Hey, Brett, so you're being really charitable right now to the prosecution. You're saying they may not have known about the blowpoke when they did it. But here's the thing. They took pictures of this blowpoke, and it should, if at some point later on the prosecution's theory turned to a blowpoke, these pictures existed in their files, and sure, they may have overlooked them, but they were absolutely discoverable, and they should have been turned over in discovery to the defense. Now, here is the really egregious part. These pictures were not made known to the defense until more than 15 years later, on the eve of a really big step in this case that we'll talk about later. But we are talking time served in jail, a lot of litigation. I mean, nearly a generation has passed before these pictures come to light, really too late. Okay, let me start with this. The prosecution, because we are able to, we really have the upper hand in investigation, right? We can be investigating people before they know it. We have access to law enforcement and different tools to help us investigate. That's why we have really a higher burden and standard when it comes to discovery. And we have to turn over materials that could help the defense. We can't pick and choose what we decide to turn over. It is incredibly serious. You could lose your bar license to be an attorney if you were to hold back exonerating evidence. If you were to do it by mistake, the second you discover it, you have to turn it over. So there's this continuing obligation for discovery. It doesn't end the second you turn over discovery, because here's the thing with cases. You're probably constantly discovering more information, especially when you're going to trial. I mean, we find things the eve of trial that doesn't look good, and you end up having to explain to the court and to the other side why you're finding this evidence so late. But you better be explaining well, and it better be true, because you will be scrutinized because of that high burden for discovery.
and you're right. The most important thing is turning it over. And
you don't have to highlight it for the other side. You don't have to tell them why you think it's important.
And Alice is absolutely right about how serious this is. And, there are horror stories about lawyers, killing themselves after really egregious discovery violations. There's a case called Brady, United States v. Brady. I think it's United States v. Brady. We just call it Brady. So the whole point of Brady is that if prosecutors have material information in their possession that may be exculpatory, they have to hand it over to the defense. They can't hide it. And what gets where the give and the joints and the problems show up are those two terms, material and exculpatory. Because you may have one view of what's material and exculpatory, and a defense attorney might have a very different view, and a court might have a very different view. And if at the end of the day, the court's view and your view aren't the same, that's a problem. So a lot of prosecutors and a lot of offices will have a much sort of broader discovery policy so that they sort of avoid that. And it runs the gamut. I mean, it depends on the office. It depends on the DA or the U.S. attorney, depending on where the prosecutions are occurring, the attorney general. But in recent times, I think in particular, people have been erring more and more on the side of turn it over. And I'll give you an example. A lot of you have seen the Netflix documentary, How to Fix a Drug Scandal. And I talked about this earlier about how it was really about drug chemists. And later on, it becomes about lawyers. And there is this hearing that is all about this question, because there is a document that the prosecution does not turn over to the defense attorney. And in the hearing, and man, that you never want to be here when the prosecutor, you're on the stand and they're showing your emails on the television screen and you're having to explain why you said the things you said. But in one of those emails, one of the prosecutors asks the investigator, why would we turn that over? Why is it relevant to his case? And then says, I really don't like him. So basically saying, I don't want to give it to him if we don't have to, because I don't like this guy. But the problem for that prosecutor is she couldn't see why this document was relevant. Assuming that she wasn't lying, and I don't think there's any reason to think so because these emails were not, produced in anticipation of litigation. They're literally just the emails back and forth between her and her investigator. But when this defense attorney finally did get a hold of that document, he saw it in a completely different way from how she had seen it. And when he saw it, knowing the information he knew, it was like a light bulb went off for him that probably never went off for the prosecutor. And it was a critical piece of information for him, and it got this attorney general's office and these prosecutors in all kinds of trouble because of it. So Alice is absolutely right, and the fact that this was never turned over to the defense is really shocking, and it's a responsibility of the police officers and the investigators to let the prosecution know. So it's perfectly plausible that the prosecutors never even knew about these photographs, but you can bet the other members of their team knew, the people who were investigating with them knew, and they should have let them know so they could turn this stuff over to the defense. And that's really sort of a constant struggle to make sure that you know everything that you need to know so you can meet these obligations.
And here's the thing people may not know. The prosecution is counted as that whole team. So even if only the police officer who found it knew, you're going to have to answer for it as the attorney. And so we kind of are the team leader, and we have to take all responsibility. That's why we're constantly asking our law enforcement, have you told me everything? I go to my agents' offices and I look through the files myself because they may not think something is relevant to turn over even to me. But it's in the possession of the government, and the government is the government. It doesn't matter if it's one slice of the government or another slice. And just to real live fact check right now, the case is actually Brady versus Maryland. And I'm not going to give Brett a hard time because it's true. Everyone just calls the case Brady, and it's long established. It's a 1963 Supreme Court case.
So it's actually a state case. There you go.
Yeah, it was a Maryland law. See, we don't even know these things because it's so ingrained in
right.
our jurisprudence.
And, that's sort of an interesting little thing for you guys who are not lawyers, who don't know a lot about how the law works. Even though that case is dealing with something out of Maryland, it's a constitutional case interpreting the Constitution, so it's binding everywhere. It's binding in all states. It's binding for federal prosecutors. Everybody is bound by that decision and has to live up to it.
That's right. It is the Supreme Court, supremacy over all other courts. States included.
Right. But not always. There's not weird.
There's weird carve-outs. That's another episode that's actually not that interesting.
Yeah, that's a really
back to the blowpoke.
Really boring episode.
Back to the murder weapon and prosecutorial misconduct. Oh wait, really quick. Let's just wrap that up. What's the recourse you can get if you are defense and exculpatory information was not turned over? Your case can be dismissed. The attorneys can be sanctioned. There can be bad faith findings for the specific people who held it, which it's kind of like on your permanent record. It's forever. What am I leaving out, Brett?
Well, I was thinking about one thing that always confused me, and all you lawyers out there can judge me for not knowing exactly how this works, just because I've never ran into it, though it's another sort of nightmare situation. At some point in your trial, usually after the jury is impaneled, jeopardy attaches to your case. And if at that point, if you have a mistrial for certain reasons, the case is just over. And when I say jeopardy attaches, double jeopardy attaches, and you can't be tried again. Now, if your case ends in a hung jury, for instance, you can't be tried again in that case. I'm trying to think whether or not a Brady violation, if significant enough, would just result in sort of a jeopardy situation. I'm not sure.
I think it totally depends on the posture of the case. But it's very possible because a lot of times these come out during something like trial, right?
Right.
So I think it depends on the posture of the case, and there isn't a bright line rule. But
it's really bad.
It's really bad. I mean, because what can happen? All that needs to happen is for the judge to publish an opinion using your name, which they're allowed to do, and saying all the bad things you've done, and that's published on in like the public record of all legal opinions, and it exists forever. People can cite to it. You're infamous in a bad way.
And if you're an officer of the law who gets mentioned in one of those decisions, we have something else called giglio, which is other information you have to turn over to the defense, which is information about testifying witnesses. So if you have a witness who's going to testify, one of the things the defense can attack them on is their credibility. Because if the jury doesn't believe them, then no matter what they say, it's not going to matter. And if you're a police officer and you have a judicial opinion saying that you withheld evidence or covered something up, basically your career's over, because you can never be used as a witness again. Every defense attorney is going to use that in every single trial you ever try and appear in.
And just so you know, if those of you haven't heard the term giglio, giglio is referring to the Supreme Court case Giglio versus United States that was decided in 1972. And you'll often hear Brady/Giglio together. I mean, I've heard it on law dramas and law shows. It's because Giglio is actually an extension by the Supreme Court of the holding in Brady versus Maryland. So this actually ended up turning into a law class that we did not intend for, but these are very important concepts and absolutely come into play in Michael Peterson's trial.
We can talk about jinx material too if we want to.
Sure, let's just do the trio. We might as well finish it off, and all of these people can pass the bar in their states. I will say this is probably more interesting to listen to than any sort of bar preparation material. So
absolutely. So you're welcome, bar students.
You're welcome,
so go
law
ahead,
students.
Alice. You can tell them all about jinx.
Now that we're like very serious about saying it correctly, okay.
Or jinx.
I think it's Jenks. So it's spelled Jenks, but you can pronounce it however you want because people love your accent, Brett.
Oh, well, I'll go with Jenks because I think it is actually Jenks material. But anyways, yeah, and that's like if you've had a witness who's testified before, usually in a grand jury, the defense gets their testimony essentially so that if they want it, if they ask for it, and they have to be testifying again. So if you intend to use this person as a witness who you used before as a witness, the defense gets that testimony so that they can compare it and make sure there are no inconsistencies. So, if they testified before the grand jury and they said, yeah, when I arrived on the scene, it was morning, right? And then at trial, they say it was evening. Well, they're going to point to that inconsistency and use it to undermine the rest of their testimony. So you have to be kind of careful about when you use witnesses.
And this happens actually a lot more than people may realize. Think about like a typical traffic violation case. The report might say one thing. It might say the officer smelled marijuana, but they don't include it in another report they write or when they testified. It may not be in contradiction, but they'll definitely point to that. And so you have to, you can't hide the ball. Every time the testifying witness has made a statement, you need to provide it so that you can potentially impeach them too. And impeaching just means point to a prior inconsistent statement.
Right.
Not to be confused with impeaching the president. That's different.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into that.
And there are other things throughout this case that we'll probably talk about more as we go on, where the prosecution made some pretty questionable decisions about what they turned over. For instance, Deborah Radish, who was the medical examiner in this case, the one who examined both Kathleen Peterson and Elizabeth Ratliff, at first did not want to say that Kathleen Peterson died because of blunt force trauma, probably because there's no real evidence that she did. And she actually sent a note to her supervisor to that effect and was told, no, it's blunt force trauma. That's what we're going to say. And that note apparently was never turned over to the defense. And that's another thing that they would want to know when they're cross-examining her in a trial, is that the thing that she is saying and saying with absolute certainty today, she wasn't thinking that back when she was looking at the body. So that's another thing that apparently the defense never received.
And here I can imagine some people who may be new to these concepts rolling their eyes and saying, well, yeah, right. The prosecution isn't going to turn over all these materials. Otherwise, it would be really hard to prosecute cases. But here's the thing. You evaluate your case and whether to continue pursuing them. And if you have enough of these Brady, Giglio, Jenks material that it makes your case vulnerable, you're probably more willing to offer a plea deal to the defendant. So you absolutely have to take this into your calculation as to whether you're going to pursue the case. And you can also drop charges. It's embarrassing and it's inconvenient, but you're still supposed to do it. So you can indict a case and you figure out down the road, our facts are not that great. This is not, a strong case. It's your duty actually to dismiss it.
And, you know that the defense attorneys are going to be annoying about this, right? They're going to point to inconsistencies that aren't really inconsistencies or things that don't really matter. And they're going to harp on those things and pound the table. And you're thinking, man, why am I going to give them this where they can use this thing that's really not that significant? It's just not your place to decide that. At the end of the day, you have to convince the jury that it's not that significant and that these inconsistencies don't matter. And that's your job, and that's the system. And if people are going to have faith in it, then prosecutors have to live up to their obligations.
This is all a precursor. I hope you stayed with us because stuff is about to really hit the fan in this case.
Right. Things are about to get more interesting. So if you just sat through the boring law talk, but like I said, you guys, there was all this crazy stuff in the beginning, but the prosecution's entire theory has just collapsed around them, right? They found the blowpoke. The blowpoke is not missing, and it's not the murder weapon. So how in the world did they convict Michael Peterson? Well, the prosecution had a star player. They had a guy that they brought in who the jury said was more convincing to them than any piece of evidence, than any other witness they heard from, and that was Duane Deaver, the blood spatter expert from the State Bureau of Investigation, who testified that this was not a fall down the stairs, that this was a homicide, and that the blood spatter proved it. And when the jury heard that, they believed it, and they convicted Michael Peterson.
As soon as the verdict is read, and you see in the documentary his attorney is preparing him, as soon as it's read, you don't have time to say anything to your family, anyone. They immediately cuff you and lead you away, and that's what happens. He stands up, they cuff him. This is heartbreaking, but he turns around and his children are bawling, and I think he mouths to them, it's going to be okay. And then they lead him away. And he spends the next 8 years in prison. He looks like a different person at the end of these 8 years. He now hobbles like an old man. He has gray hairs, and he looks like he's aged 20 years. And then things get a little bit interesting, because now it has come to light in someone else's case, a man named Greg Taylor, that the state's witness, Duane Deaver, who also testified in Peterson's trial, had actually falsified or not turned over important exonerating information in Greg Taylor's case. And it came out quickly after an investigation that Duane Deaver, this was not a one-time sort of slip-up by Deaver, but this was a pattern and practice of him lying repeatedly in order to help the prosecution. He not only lied about his qualifications, but he withheld evidence if it was going to hurt the prosecution, and he completely just falsified other evidence. So in that Greg Taylor case, Greg Taylor had been convicted of murder, and kind of the key evidence of the state was he was driving a truck that got stuck in the mud that was found near the body of the murder victim. And there was something on his truck, little spots of red that looked like blood, and it was sent to be tested by Duane Deaver. And the tests came back to show that the blood was not human blood, and Duane Deaver never turned over that information. Talk about exonerating information, because that blood did not match a human. And so This was incredible information that came out. It made the news. And now, because we know Duane Deaver has this pattern and practice of falsifying information or withholding exonerating information, did he do it in Peterson's case?
And I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy because it's not just that Duane Deaver is a really good blood spatter expert who knows when to hide evidence and when to turn it over to help the prosecution. It turns out he's not even very good at his job.
He's like really bad at it.
Yeah, and he makes all these claims that aren't true. Like he claims that he's written reports for 200 cases and he's been involved in 500 cases. He says at one point that he has been at the scene of something like 30 falls, Alice. It's some number like
that's
that.
Right. He went to 30 falls.
The number's actually 0.
Yeah, he'd never been to one, right?
Yeah, he's never been to one. But he presents himself as just this incredible expert on everything. And if you watch the documentary, it's kind of funny because, you know, sometimes they tell you don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. And there are a couple times where Rudolph will ask him a question and it actually kind of blows up in his face. And I think how many times have you been to a fall is one of them, because Rudolph asked him that and he says something like 30 times, right? And it's like, wow, okay, well, maybe this guy is an expert in falls. And if he says this isn't a fall, then maybe he knows what he's talking about. And it just turns out that all of this stuff is just false. He doesn't have nearly any of the qualifications that he claimed to have. He's just really good actor.
And you know what's crazy? You know what's crazy, Brett? Duane Deaver is a blood analyst, right? He's this like lab guy. He is not a prosecutor. He's not an advocate. He's supposed to be a scientist, right? We send things off to the lab all the time: fingerprints, blood analysis, drug analysis, and those people are supposed to essentially be robots and not have any point of view. The science says what it says, and that's it. And so, like, it's almost, I don't even understand why he has a dog in this fight. You know, I mean, you don't get notches the way a prosecutor does.
You know, I think the problem is, and this is another just discussion all by itself. And let's briefly talk about this, or maybe not briefly, maybe in depth. We'll talk about it. Expert testimony. So we're going to include on the website some documents that talk about this, and they talk about, one of them is from the expertinstitute.com, and it actually talks about the problem with blood spatter analysis, but it does it through the lens of Duane Deaver. So that's actually pretty interesting, and I think you'll get a lot out of that. If you really want to go crazy and really dive into this and understand some of the problems that we're having in criminal justice with really forensic evidence of all kinds, there was a report that was put out by the Obama administration that's all about forensics and the problems thereof. It's incredibly controversial, very controversial in the forensics world, in the law enforcement community. There's a lot of people who think it goes way too far, but you should check it out anyway, just so you'll know sort of that perspective on all this stuff. And like I said, that'll be on our website. But what Alice said is absolutely true. And you are probably thinking, whatever, you guys want them to be on your side. You want them to tell you what you want to hear. And I mean, sure, there's a little bit of that, right? Like, if I've got a case and I need you, and I know the guy's, selling cocaine, right? And I need you to get on that stand and say, I tested it and it's cocaine. I absolutely want you to do that, right? But I want you to do it because it is cocaine, because I don't know. And I need you. I need your unbiased opinion. I need you to tell me what the science says, because I'm not a scientist. I'm not a science major, as I've said multiple times. And I have no idea what blood spatter looks like when someone's beaten to death versus when they fall down the stairs. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, I think Duane Deaver ruined this case. And I think he ruined it because there are people out there to this day, and they're going to do it with this podcast, who were arguing about the blood and saying, how could Michael Peterson be innocent because of this blood thing? And how could he be guilty because of this blood thing? But all of that is tainted. It's all based on what Duane Deaver told you. You don't know. I don't know. I certainly don't know the fluid dynamics of blood, spatter after somebody's been hit on the head or whatever. And that's why we need Duane Deaver. And that's why we need people who are shooting us straight. And that's why I think the jury believed in him, because he was the expert. And we have this whole process that we go through in the system to ensure that an expert knows what they're talking about.
Right. You qualify the expert.
The Daubert analysis? Exactly. You have to qualify the expert. You have to go through and show that not only are they qualified as an expert, but the thing they're qualified in is actually science. It's not junk science.
So ahead of time, before trial, you actually get the resume and the body of work of your expert, and you can file something called a Daubert motion if you want to challenge them as an expert. Let's say Duane Deaver actually put out there that he'd never been to a fall, that he'd really had never written reports by himself. You could probably file and say his inexperience does not qualify him as a blood pattern expert. And you would litigate that ahead of time. But even if an expert survives a Daubert motion and they go to trial, the first thing you do when you put an expert on the stand is to go through their resume so that the jury can also say, wow, well, this person clearly knows what they're talking about. All right, I have a reason to believe them. And, the prosecution really kind of shot themselves in the foot. They didn't realize it was going to be 8 years later, but in their closing, they said, listen to Duane Deaver, believe him because he's on our side, or something to that effect. I'm probably messing up the quote, but that's not an appropriate argument, by the way. You don't say to believe someone just because they work for the state. Right. You need to believe them because they are an expert. And, that blows up in their face.
We call it improper bolstering.
Right. And that's all she does. All the prosecutor really does is improper bolstering. But that, blows up later because obviously Duane Deaver was lying. So what exactly did he do? So remember, he had what he did wrong, among many other things, is instead of what you're supposed to do in science, right? Start from the beginning. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. The test is what the test is. He knew what he wanted the outcome to be, and he set up all these tests to try and recreate the outcome he wanted. And that is it turns science on its head.
And you can sort of see that. And it's interesting. The Duane Deaver thing I'm really fascinated by. Alice was talking about qualifying the expert. If you've ever read Aphrodite Jones's book on the Michael Peterson case, it's called like The Perfect Husband or something. And she's very pro-prosecution, and she's pro-prosecution in that book. But it was written before all this came out. So when she's writing about Duane Deaver, he's like this conquering hero. And Rudolph actually gives him a really hard time during the qualification part to try and do exactly what Alice is describing. And it's funny to read Aphrodite Jones and her take on that and sort of criticizing Rudolph for doing that. And sure enough, Rudolph was right in the end. But Alice is right. There are so many videos of Duane Deaver doing various things. And there's the one video where he's striking a blood source with the blowpoke, trying to reproduce that blood spatter. And he's not striking the blood source the way any person would strike it. He's doing it in a way that he thinks will generate that blood source or that blood spatter pattern. And it's one thing to do it to prove that it's possible that this, if done this way, could have generated that blood spatter. So, they do the shorts test at some point to show that the blood could have gotten in Michael Peterson's shorts, if he was striking Kathleen Peterson in a certain way, and they get it, and yay, now we can say this, right? But the problem is, Duane doesn't just say it's possible. He does these experiments. He gets the result he wants to get, and then he testifies to the jury that because of that experiment, that's what happened. Or it's more likely than not that that's what happened. It's not a test to see what probably would happen if the prosecution's theory is correct. It's purely to justify him being able to say it's more likely that Michael Peterson killed someone or killed his wife, and that's how this blood pattern came to be. It's just real shoddy science, and it was shoddy when he did it. The problem is, if you're sitting in that jury or you're sitting in the crowd and Duane Deaver's doing all this weird stuff, you're like, man, that's weird. That doesn't seem like it proves anything, but he is the expert, right? That's the problem. You always go to that. I mean, expert testimony is so dangerous.
They get a lot of weight. It is a lot. Yeah,
So
it's dangerous because it gets a lot of weight. And one of the funniest things that happens in all of trial, which is, it's not funny because it's very serious, but Rudolph says, because the blood source that Brett was just talking about was like a sponge soaked in red paint or something like that. He was like, that experiment doesn't tell us that striking someone on the head causes this blood spatter pattern. This just shows us that a sponge hit makes this pattern. And he's right.
Yeah.
He calls it out
And
at the trial.
They bring in Henry Lee, who gives his expert opinion, and it's the opposite of Duane Deaver's. The problem with that is the jury's always going to view the defense expert as a hired gun. They're always going to credit the prosecution expert a little bit more. And one of the reasons is they really are supposed to be more of a neutral party. Even though they're testifying for the prosecution, they really are supposed to be approaching this purely from what does the science say? They're not being paid. Henry Lee is there to testify to that. If he couldn't testify to that, he wouldn't testify and he wouldn't get paid, right? And you understand that. Now, what's interesting is Henry Lee actually got his start in Connecticut running the blood spatter analysis unit for one of the Connecticut prosecutor's offices. And just last week, several men who had been convicted of murder on the basis of some of Henry Lee's blood spatter analysis were exonerated and released. So it just goes to show that this kind of evidence in particular is questionable. And there are people who are really starting to question the value of blood spatter analysis at all. Now, where this gets interesting and difficult, everybody's favorite serial killer, Ted Bundy, was convicted on the basis of bite pattern analysis. Most people don't think bite pattern analysis is a valid science anymore. Most people reject it altogether. Well, Ted Bundy wouldn't have been convicted without it. So, can you dismiss all this science altogether, or is it something where we just need to do a better job of really refining it? In the Ted Bundy case, for instance, just to show you that it wasn't, this is just the way we'll get this guy. Ted Bundy had a very unique, unusual bite pattern. His teeth were all funky. So it actually probably did work there, where it won't necessarily work with your average person. Another one you hear about a lot is fiber analysis. Fiber analysis is under a lot of attack now. If you're familiar with the West Memphis Three, you know that fibers found on the bodies of the three victims were used in part to convict the West Memphis Three. And the problem was those fibers were from things like clothes you would get at Walmart, right? So clothes that probably 95% of the people in West Memphis, Arkansas were wearing. So how definitive is that to say, well, this matches, a shirt that his mom has or whatever. So that's the problem you have with this expert evidence. It's so important and people put so much value and so much stock into it. And I guarantee you, if you go on Reddit or Twitter or the feed on our YouTube page when we're talking about this case, there are going to be people who were saying Michael Peterson had to do it because of this blood spatter and that blood spatter and this other blood thing. And I just feel like in this case in particular, because of Duane Deaver, I don't know how much stock you can put in any of that.
Right, because he also messed with the scene. I mean, there were inconsistencies in the pictures that were taken by the police. And here's really the kicker. Michael Peterson was charged with and convicted with first-degree murder, which is premeditated murder. And the only thing that puts premeditation is Duane in his the prosecution's case is Duane Deaver's testimony. Am I right on that?
Right. You are right on that. And we talked about this when we talked about Billy Woodward and the neighborhood killing case. And we talked about the difference between first degree murder and second degree murder and premeditation. And we talked about lesser included charges. There was no lesser included charge here.
Nope, they were going for the guttural.
Yeah. It was either you convict him of first degree murder and you send him away for the rest of his life, or you send him home. That was their option.
In other words, this couldn't have been heat of the moment. He couldn't have had a psychotic break or heat of the passion. This had to be premeditated in order for them to be able to convict on first-degree murder.
Which the interesting thing about that, this is an aside, but the prosecution's theory is all over the map in this case. We talked about this earlier, that one of their theories is money. Money's usually premeditated. If you want to kill somebody for their insurance, you're doing that in a premeditated way. But their other theory is that Kathleen Peterson discovered photographs of naked men on Michael Peterson's computer, that she found out that he was going to have these rendezvous with young men, and that on the basis of that, she got very angry and confronted him, and maybe they got into a fight or whatever, and he killed her then. That actually doesn't fit with premeditated murder. And I always thought that was interesting, that they put so much stock in that as a motive, even though it undermines their theory. And I think that's where Duane Deaver comes back in, because Duane Deaver, in the way he describes the way this crime had to happen, indicated that at some point Peterson essentially decided to kill her, that it went beyond some sort of angry rage and moved to, I'm going to finish this person off.
So because of this Duane Deaver revelation, usually you don't, after you've been convicted, you don't get to go back to the court and ask for a new trial. But because of this newly discovered evidence, Rudolph comes back to represent Michael pro bono this time, and it's like a mini trial. It lasts for days. Although the first trial lasted for months, this was still a very lengthy hearing. The judge ultimately, and this almost never happens, decides that because of the newly discovered evidence, the newly discovered information about Duane Deaver, Michael Peterson did not have a fair trial in the first instance, and he gets a new trial.
Which is wild.
That's why, and you know why this is wild? This is, we talked about this with Foya. You win, but you don't. He's still indicted. And remember, they had a multi-month trial, and now, like a decade later, they have to go through it again. So it's not like you win. It's not like you're free.
But the second trial is not going to be like the first trial was, because our friend the judge is having some second thoughts.
Right. Oh man, is he. So he's had some time to think about it, and he reconsiders some other prior evidentiary rulings that, you know what, in the first instance I thought he got wrong. And we can talk more about this, but Peterson's computer had been seized back when he was arrested, and that's where they found all of the male porn and all of his solicitations for male escorts. And the judge decides that that seizure was actually illegal. So the fruits of an illegal seizure, you're not allowed to use. And what's that? It's going to be all the evidence about Peterson's homosexual relationships. That's a lot of stuff. And that the Ratliff evidence, the woman from Germany, that should not have come into the case at all. Those are like the two bombshells that came from the prosecution. And now he's saying, I shouldn't have let those in. With their case now in shambles, the prosecution, they still have an indictment. They still have to move forward with the case, right? They could dismiss the case, but as Peterson's attorney explains to Peterson, they're not going to do that because of their public face, because of Kathleen's sisters, who are just really, for lack of a better word, rabid. They want to see Peterson locked up, and they will not be quiet about this if the prosecution were to dismiss the case. The prosecution offers Michael Peterson an Alford plea. And an Alford plea is interesting. So typically you think you just plead guilty or not guilty, but an Alford plea is a guilty plea, but the defendant gets to proclaim that they're actually innocent of the crime, but they're just going to admit enough facts so that he would have been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and he would have a conviction. That sounds like a middle ground. And this is, I mean, it is essentially it is a win for Michael because he's maintained his innocence throughout all of this. But the prosecution gets their guilty plea and he gets sentenced. He gets a sentence as well. Now, in this case, it's time served because he'd already served 8 years. So he wasn't going to do additional time in jail. And this is interesting because even though the Alford plea gives Michael what he wants, which is to maintain his innocence, he really didn't want to take it. Because he's like, you know what? They've taken 8 years of my life. They've dragged me through the mud. I am now destitute. I used to have a nice house and a stream of income. I have nothing now. Why not just fight to the death? But if any of you have been through a trial, whether as a participant or watching it or being a jury member, you know how exhausting trial is. And a multi-month trial is exhausting not only for you, but for your family, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And he decides that he doesn't want to put his family through this. Taking a step back we've talked a lot about the law. Let's talk about kind of the human side of it. In a lot of ways, I think his children who have supported him through all of this and Michael, the grieving must be so strange of Kathleen. Let's take Michael out of it, whether or not you think he did it. But like these kids haven't really been able to grieve their mom because of this ongoing litigation. So I think Michael decides, I'm not going to put them through that again. And he takes the Alford plea and he pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter, but maintains his innocence. So he first gets out of prison in 2011, and that was pursuant to the judge granting him a new trial because of Duane Deaver. The Alford plea wasn't finalized until 2017. So for 6 years, he was still, even though he wasn't in prison, he was under house arrest for a lot of that time, and then he was still under the shadow of this first-degree murder indictment.
I think that's one reason he took it because, man, it's like, just let this end,
I know. And he's he's in his 70s at this point.
Right. If he goes to trial and he wins, what does he gain, really? I mean, he gets to say he's innocent. There are going to be plenty of people. If he'd gone to trial and he'd won, I don't think there's a single person out there who thinks he's guilty who would change their mind. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. So, honestly, and it's kind of funny because people treat the Alford plea differently depending on whether they like the defendant or not. So the West Memphis Three, who are just beloved by the true crime community, they took an Alford plea and everybody celebrated like, yay, they're out of jail. And then Michael Peterson takes the Alford plea and people are like, haha, he pled guilty. That means he's guilty. And it really is. You could just take whatever you want to out of it. And you see that a little bit from Kathleen's sisters who, look, they're portrayed very badly in the documentary. The documentarians are obviously very much on Michael's side by that point. But you got to remember, they think this man brutally murdered their sister. There's a reason they're angry. There's a reason they want justice. They want the guy who murdered their sister to go to jail.
Right. And I know I was harsh on them earlier, but I would do the same, if my loved one was murdered.
Oh, they're crazy. There's no question about that. Like, I don't think they are rabid. I think Candace Zamperini would agree with you 100% that that's how she is. And not always useful. I think there's a point where she goes off on the new DA in the documentary that's not helpful and wasn't appropriate and wasn't fair to her.
Oh, gosh.
But you get why she's mad. It's just the situation is so weird and difficult. And look, I don't think the prosecution would have won. I understand why Michael didn't roll the dice, but when you don't have the gay stuff anymore, for lack of a better term.
Right, so you don't have two staircases. That, I mean, when I heard that fact, not knowing anything about this case, I was like, of course he did it. Two staircases, two women dead at the bottom of staircases. Sounds like he did it.
Yeah, same thing. But you don't have that anymore. And your blood spatter evidence is completely in shambles. There's no way you're going to be able to talk about that blood spatter without your screw ups coming in from before. Oh, and by the way, you don't have a murder weapon anymore because your blowpoke is not the murder weapon. And so what are you going to say? Trust us? This guy did it? I don't know. I think there's a reason the prosecution offered that, and
Right.
there's a reason the family took it. Because if you watch the documentary, you know there's a reason this took 6 years. Because in 2011, when Michael was let out of prison, the position of the family was no offered plea, we go back to trial. And
Right.
by 2017, the family's behind it. And I think the prosecution came to him and said, look, we're going to lose. If we do this, we're going to lose. So you either take this guilty plea or you watch the man proclaim his innocence from the courtroom stairs.
Right. But Michael, like we said, he spent all his money on his first trial. And he also, because lawyers are expensive, we know that. And he also has a $25 million wrongful death judgment that Kathleen's daughter, had won against him as well. He ended up writing a book called Behind the Staircase, but what he did was have all the profits directed to a charity to avoid having to pay them to Caitlin. I'm not really sure if that strategy would work though. Only if you can have the ability to direct money, then I think you can control it for purposes of taxes or lawsuits. I feel like if there were a judgment against him, the court could probably do something to, direct the money to pay his $25 million wrongful death judgment.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there are cases that say exactly that if you can direct the money, then you can't claim. Because, for instance, you can't make a salary, direct that salary to a charity, and then not pay taxes on the salary. Courts have said, no, you can't do that. So I feel like this is the same thing. I don't know if that's held up or not. I don't know if anybody bought that book.
We haven't looked into this. Yeah, I haven't looked into that. But his other 4 children, Margaret, Martha, Todd, and Clayton, all still believe that the justice system failed their dad, and they, it didn't seem like they ever wavered in the 15, 16 years that this went on.
No, I think that's right. Essentially, the battle lines in this case are drawn very early. At first, Caitlin, who was Kathleen Peterson's daughter by her prior marriage, when she was Kathleen Atwater, was with Michael and basically said they had a perfect marriage. Can't imagine this happening. She very quickly, though, upon seeing the crime scene, and as bloody as it is, seeing some of the autopsy photos, she moved over into the prosecution camp and never wavered from that. So I think pretty much people formed their opinions very early in this case, and they really didn't change much.
Well, that's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we have now covered the overall story of the case, and we've gone into some detail in certain places. But as those of you who know this story know, there is so much more to talk about that we haven't discussed. So next week on The Prosecutors, we're going to talk. Number one, we'll walk through a detailed timeline so you guys have an idea of exactly when everything happened. We'll talk about some of the other forensic evidence in this case, including things like red neurons. Talk a little bit more about the finding of the blowpoke. There's some interesting things that happened around that. We'll talk about some emails that Michael Peterson may or may not have deleted. And eventually we'll get to everyone's favorite avian suspect. But that's next week.
Who could it be?
Who could it be? But until then, Alice, do you want to take us out today?
Sure. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And we are the Prosecutors.
It's what?
It's tough being a prosecutor.
I know.
I'm tired.
Thank you so much.
I just thought you needed the pick-me-up. It's
Crack 'em
weird to
up.
visually see your laugh on the audio track. It's like little spurts.
I know.
Anyways, we are talking like lunatics. I shouldn't even be as tired as you.
Have your name on the low pick?
Yeah.
Oh,
but then I have
I'm
one
going to
on
talk
the
about it?
Yeah. Hey, really quick. Sorry.
Of course.
I'm sorry. It's like when someone's about to jump off, like go skydiving, you're like, wait!